Hey, it's Corey from Blood Brothers Racing. Today in part 3 of Blown Budget, we are going to talk about what's in the box, man.
What's in the box? What's in the fucking box?
And we're also going to talk about what I know about blowers. It'll be probably a pretty short video, but we're going to talk about it nonetheless. Maybe it'll help somebody out in the future. Anyway, let's get into it. Let's talk about what's in the box. Spoiler alert, it's my new blower. But I haven't seen it yet in person. All I've seen is the pictures online. Looks to be a really nice unit from the pictures. But I do know that it's from a cop in California. So I'm expecting this thing just to be filled up with Krispy Kreme wrappers and fuzzy handcuffs. But we're going to open it up and give it a look. So I'm hoping this doesn't turn out to be a problem. But it does appear that one of these bolt holes that or one of these bolts that he put in may have got a little twerked in shipping. But other than that, man, he packaged it really, really well. So let's get that top off there, see what's underneath. So the snout is definitely too long, as you can see, about 2 inches. So I'm gonna have to buy a new snout. That's not a big deal. The hat fits good, and there's the distributor I was talking about. It touches it, so it needs to be replaced. All right, let's talk blowers, and not barkers. Hopefully he's not gonna be a barker today. That's Himmy. He's being a shop dog tonight. Let me give you a brief overview, and then I'll do a class, a 101 from a amateur, you might want to say. But I do know for 100% certainty this is how blowers work. Real brief. Money goes in there, somehow gets into here, and then horsepower comes out there. But more often than not, all the hopes and dreams fall out of there. So be prepared for that. I've had that happen. All right, so let's talk blowers. I'm gonna tell you a few things that I found out over the years of buying these things. Some mistakes that I've made that cost me either money, time, or effort, that hopefully by me telling you this, if you're new to buying a blower, or if you're just upgrading, or you just wanna know the differences in blowers, from your standard Detroits to your competition stuff, this is the video for you. So let's start talking about some blowers here. The original purpose of the Detroit diesel was to scavenge air for a diesel, a 2-stroke diesel. And they found out in the 40s that they could put them on airplanes so they could get higher altitude. And the whole idea and concept behind it is it's able to take air, push it around the outside of the blower, and then shove it into the intake, raising the PSI level, which also in turn means you can put more fuel, get more power. It's as simple as that. There's many different ways that you can produce more power, higher compression, bigger motors, but there's a limitation to all that because you're forced with atmospheric air, which is 14.7 PSI at sea level. If you can cram more air, you can cram more fuel. So that's what the power adders do. Different types of power adders are going to be your NOS, which is stuff you see in like Fast and Furious movies. And it's just a bottle of gas that has oxygen in it, and with that you can add fuel, more power. Or centrifugal style blowers, or turbos, which is to me is about the same thing. One is ran off the exhaust gases, the other one's a centrifugal, like a Pro Charger, is ran off the crank, similar to a roots blower. And the last one, the one that we're going to talk about today, is roots blowers. This is my new one that I just purchased, and this is a race prep blower. And this one over here is an actual Detroit diesel from an inline diesel. So Detroit has two styles of motors. They had the inline 6, 8 cylinder Detroits, and they also had a V series. This one right here is actually for a V series, and you can tell that because the case is rounded on the edges, okay, and it mounts like this. This is a V style Detroit diesel. That was one of my first mistakes that I made. I didn't know there was a difference. It's not a big deal because you can buy adapter plates like this that change it to the normal manifold. But there was another issue with the 6V that I was unaware of, is you can't mount two carburetors to the top of one of these without a mill and some serious fabrication. This plate is a two carburetor plate adapter, but I had to do a bunch of milling and stuff to get the bolts that hold down for the front. I don't think you'd have that same problem with a 8V71. That's something to take in consideration. The V series, although they work, they have a problem with when you're trying to modify them for race applications. This one's still a nice tight blower. It's not a big deal, okay? The new blower is a legit race blower, but it's also the case that would be put on a 6, or this would be an 8 inline Detroit diesel. And you can tell that by how the case gets mounted to the side. And I'll have some pictures up here to show the difference in what the originals looked like. That's all you really need to know about the differences between a 6V and an 8V versus a normal 871, 671. Now, these things come in many sizes. The sizes range from all the way down. BDS now makes one that's a 4V71, but Detroit had that as well. And they come all the way up to a 1471, which is pretty standard, but they even make them up to 1871. And what that actually means is the 6 to 71 part is it was meant for a 6-cylinder diesel, 71 cubic inches per cylinder. So 8 would be 8-cylinder, 71 cubic inches per cylinder. And that's what the sizing it references, the 8 to 71 to 6 to 71. That's what all that means, okay? The case length has nothing to do with the sizing. The sizing is all done with the length of the rotor, and this is the rotor inside here. There's also different styles of rotors too. This is a 60-degree helix. They also make straight lobe, which is not very efficient, and they make the 60-degree, and then they also make a 120. The 120 is getting closer to a screw style blower, but it's still acceptable in some race leagues. You have to check your own to make sure that that's legal. The next thing you need to know about the rotors is if they're striped or not, anodized, all that stuff. So that's where we're going to get into the performance of these. So I'm going to put these in 4 different categories of performance. You have your standard, comes straight from the factory Detroit diesel, which would be a stage 1 blower in my eyes. Many manufacturers will just make them new with aftermarket cases, but it's going to be aluminum rotors with no Teflon strips, and it's not going to be coated at all. So it can only really be ran with race gas or just regular gas. And we'll talk about fuels and compression here in just a minute. Your next level of performance is going to be anodized rotors. And what that gives you the ability to do is to run E85. One problem with the blower that you may have, is heat. These things produce heat while they're sitting there even idling. And gasoline doesn't help with heat. When I was running the 6V71, I was getting intake temperatures of plus 200 degrees, which is not good for horsepower. It actually robs you horsepower. The idea behind having E85 with the alcohol and the fuel content, it actually cools the intake charge. So you'll have intake temperatures that are lower. We'll talk about that in performance modifications in just a minute. The next level of performance, stage 3, would be anodized rotors and a single Teflon strip. This is called a 6-point strip. If you look inside the rotors here, this one is an 18-point, but a 6-point strip will just have one of these per lobe. All right, and they are good for a little bit more boost, but the trade-off is you're going to have higher intake temperatures particularly at idle. Plus these Teflon strips wear out. So the longer you wear them, the longer you run them, the less boost you're gonna end up having over years of use. If it's just track use, you'll have no problem. The next level of performance, the highest one, is going to be the Stage 4 blower, which is this one right here. And it's got 18 points of Teflon. And what that does is the air that's coming in will get squeezed between the rotors and then shoved out the bottom. And the tighter that gap and seal is going to be, the more PSI you can get. So this is the highest level of racing. I'm sure there's higher top alcohol or even nitro. I'm sure there's probably some more intricacies there, but as far as the stuff that the home gamer like us is going to be using, this is kind of the top level. With those different performances of rotors, let's talk about openings. So on a standard blower, you're gonna have a rectangular opening just like that. And this is a good look at what a standard Stage 1 blower rotors look like. Where the seals are on that blower is just a piece of aluminum that they shave down in a lathe to get the clearances correct. But they all turn just like that. Okay. This is a standard opening for a discharge of a blower. So that's the intake of a normal blower, and that's the discharge. So you can see it's about the same. The next level is going to be what they call a 60-degree discharge. The blower shop and other ones do it, where they take, and we'll look at this one more time, and I'll show a picture of it, but they take this opening and then they pie cut it to where this area right here is kind of closed off, and that helps with efficiency of the blower. All right, and I'll explain right now why that's important. So this is what they call a retro front discharge, and as you can see, that's the same opening we were talking about. This is the only part of it that actually discharges air. And what it's actually doing is when air comes in, and it's a misconception that the air comes through the center from the top, it actually gets pushed around the outside of the blower and the rotor. And then the rotors actually squeeze the air and it all comes out right here. And the reason these are more efficient is because it has all this extra room that it can't leak back out. So it's squeezing it all the way to this point and discharging it out of the front. And this is a retro front discharge blower. The next level up from this is a high helix. And a high helix will look just like this, with the exception is that this is all blocked off. Okay, so you won't have, this area right here won't be a discharge, it'll just be this tiny little area. And those are for max performance. Imagine that you have a wet rag and you're trying to get all the water out of it and you wring it out. That's exactly what they're doing with the performance of these blowers, is from the standard to this style or even the high helix, it's giving more time to wring out the water and provide more boost. So that's the difference there. All right, the last thing we need to talk about as far as the characteristics of blowers is the snout length. That's gonna matter. If you buy a kit, you probably don't have to worry about it much. But as you can see, this snout, which is gonna be from the front of the case to the outside edge of where the pulley gets mounted. This one is a 7 1/4, and the old one is a 5. So you can see the snout lengths are quite a bit different. That's going to matter for a couple of reasons. One, when you go to these performance blowers where they're front discharge or high helix, you actually have to push the blower back on the intake. So if I was just to mount the new blower, the front discharge part would be right here. So you have to physically move the blower back in order to locate that discharge over top of the intake manifold. When you do that, you end up pushing the case back, so you end up having to get a different blower snout length. And the way that you measure that is you put it on the car, and you, with a straight edge from the blower pulley, you go up and you measure to the case, and that gives you your blower snout length. Most companies that make snouts, they come in 3, 5, 6, and 8 inches, 2-inch increments roughly, and then you can buy spacers that go between the blower pulley and the snout to make up that difference. And if you want to really fine tune it, put it on a lathe. I actually made my own for this one, and they're super simple. Whenever we go to install this blower, I'll probably make my own as well, and I'll take you through that process. It's not that big a deal. All right, lastly, let's talk about what the blower actually does on the vehicle as it's turning. So the blower turns just like this, clockwise. The air gets pushed around the outside and squeezed down. That's going to raise the intake pressure, and it's going to raise your effective compression. And at certain compression, as many know, you have to judge the fuel that you're going to use for that. So gasoline's good up to about 11.5 to 1. And after that, you need to start looking into alternative fuels. So anything between 11.5 to 1 to 13, you're definitely in the race gas territory. And anything above 13 to 1, you're going to have to use alcohol or methanol. It's really the only thing that's going to be stable enough to keep from detonation. So make sure you take that into consideration. There's plenty of charts out there, and I'll link some down below, of what your effective compression ratio is at what PSI. So be sure to take note of that, because you could really damage things really quickly. All right, so the last thing that we want to talk about is kind of the pros and cons of all this stuff. We've talked about the characteristics and things that I've made mistakes on was the 6V71. And then before I bought this one, I almost made the mistake of buying an extreme performance 871, which what I mean by that, it was actually an 871 rotors, so they could call it an 871. In their class, they were limited to their rotor length. But it was in a 1471 case, which if you look at the pictures I'm about to show here, you're going to see the 1471 is a lot larger. I think it's 4 inches longer. And then you run into firewall issues and everything else. So I dodged that mistake, and I hope you can too. This is an 871 front discharge, which means it's a little bit longer, and I still have to set it back. But I had made provisions for it on the truck, and I'm fine there. A couple other cons that you're going to run into is not only different setback links and everything else that goes along with trying to purchase a blower, but the initial upfront cost. Just this Detroit over here, the 6V that I bought, it probably cost around $5,000 to kit out, meaning that's pulleys, idlers, the bottom pulley, that's minus the carburetors, okay? This blower here is probably going to be, if you had to fully kit it, is probably going to be more in the range of $8,000 to $10,000. I was able to purchase this blower used, so that's saving quite a bit of money there, and I'm going to be able to reuse some of the stuff that's on the motor. So cost is a huge concern. The other thing is, the more performance-oriented blower, the more horsepower that it's actually going to rob from your motor. So if you're not all-out performance or doing a max effort motor, I would probably stick to the stage 1 or 2 performance of the blower. If you just want a little street strip, enjoy it on, that type of stuff. But if you want the higher performance, the more efficiency, it's going to rob some power just to turn the thing. Some of the top fuel guys, the big 871 blowers, some of the 1471s, they can rob up to 500-700 horsepower of power the motors, just parasitic loss. So just take that into consideration. Don't overshoot your goal, and make sure you pick the blower that's proper to your application. This 6V71 did me solid. With a 383, I was easily in the 700 plus range horsepower, maybe even touching 800. This one right here should have no problem getting me to the 1200 horsepower range, which is kind of where I'm looking to get to. All right, so I'm hoping that in some of this information has helped somebody, and if it didn't, at least I've got it out there. There was a small niche in YouTube world that there wasn't anything that speaks specifics to the generalities of these blowers. So I tried to get it all factual, but if I'm wrong, please comment down below and let me know, and let everybody else know where I'm wrong. I'll even maybe make a rebuttal video just to make sure that I'm not feeding the wrong grass to the wrong horse here. So make sure that you keep me honest down there. Tell me if I've done something or said something wrong, and I'll be sure to correct it. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please like. And if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. And the biggest honor for us is share it, because it's the only way we're going to grow the channel is if you guys share it. So thanks again. Love you guys. Until next time. Peace.